Hey guys, it's Magna back here for the final video of my analysis for each race and what they got new to play with in Legacy of the Void. So basically I'm going to be going through all the changes that they announced as well as some general changes that they announced to kind of explain how I feel like the game is going to develop over time throughout beta and what it's going to feel like when it starts to come out in whatever iteration you get to play it. So let's just go ahead and start off with some general changes that they announced. As it is right now, all races start the game with 12 workers instead of 6. Basically to kind of skip the whole part of the game where you're just sitting there making workers and nothing interesting is going on. I'm not sure if that number is going to stay there. I don't anticipate it. I'd say 9 is probably more reasonable for various reasons that we won't get into too much. The other changes they made is the starting resources at minerals and geysers is reduced as well. I'm not going to focus too much on these numbers here because they're going to change a lot, I'm sure. But the whole idea is that they want bases to mine out faster and they want the game to start faster. So that a whole bunch of different things are going on at once and it forces people to expand rather than sitting on low incomes the whole game. And you'll be at the point, especially with Zerg, where you're thinking about taking your 4th base every game, no matter what's going on, around maybe like 10 minutes, assuming these numbers stick around. So that's going to change the game a lot. It's going to be a lot faster, a lot different. A couple of other things they've announced is that they're going to be doing automated daily tournaments, which I thought was something they should have done a while ago, since considering people have been asking for it, it's a really common suggestion that they get. Also, Archon mode is something that we didn't really see coming, but it's also could be pretty cool. Basically, it's a 2v2 where one team takes control of one player, essentially, and the other team takes control of the other player. So it's like a 1v1, wherein each side of the 1v1 actually has 2 players controlling the same set of units. So, let's go ahead and jump into the actual unit changes and what I have to say about those. And to be totally honest, everything that they announced for Zerg, I'm actually really happy with. Especially this. This first unit that they talked about is the Ravager, and I cannot express how much I love this unit. This is an upgraded roach. You can basically morph these from a roach, and its whole deal is that it has this ability where you can shoot somewhere. You basically choose where it's going to fire, and after a short period of time, a thing comes down from the sky and kind of lands in that area and does damage. But the really cool thing about it is that it breaks force fields. And this is so cool because it will really eliminate a lot of the stupid Gateway and Immortal All-In builds that there are that people have been running forever that are just so boring to watch, that just are so unoriginal, and it just kills the variety in the game. It also kind of makes for very short and uninteresting games. I can't express how much I'm glad to see something to deal with force fields for Zerg, because there are a lot of situations against Zerg where force fields were just way too strong and way too common, and it just made the game too linear. So that's a really cool change, I think. And the other thing that they obviously do is they deal damage to units for whatever they hit. So in this one you can see there's a void right there that has been fungled and is being hit by this, so it does hit air units as well. And this mechanic is just so fun. I can't wait to see this actually put into games, because just watching it from the show matches, I was so excited to see it there. And this is one ability that, in one unit, that I just hope that they do not touch, because the idea is perfect. The idea is great. I love it so much. This is by far the best idea I have seen in all of the changes of any race. It's so cool. And if you haven't watched the show match videos, go back and find those and watch them, because this ability is really, really fun to watch. And I'm sure will be very fun to use as well. It employs a lot of different micro that Zerg has not really had to think about before. It can present a whole bunch of different game states. I love it so much. I can't say enough good things about this. And I really don't anticipate this changing too much, because it just feels good as it is now. I'm sure some subtle changes like damage and health or whatever for the unit are going to change, but this concept, it better stick around because it's the best idea they had. So let's move on. Let's check out the lurker. And yes, for those of you that have played Starcraft 1 or especially Brood War, will know what this unit is. It's basically a unit that burrows and it kills stuff that's on the ground. And the idea was that you can kind of take control of an area and it'll kill a lot of really small units. So you can use this in a multitude of ways. You can use it just as a big staple in your army to try and defend yourself from Terran advancing on you, which is something that I think is what Zergs have been lacking for a really long time, against Marines especially, because the Marines would just run away and they would be able to sort of out-micro your Banelings and Zerglings for quite a while. This one just says, yo, if you want to do that, you have to come up and deal with me. And if you're just going to sit there and kind of derp around, then you're gonna lose. So it's a cool unit in the sense that you can finally gain position against Terran without having to make a million Banelings and just hope they don't get blown up by Widow Mines. So lurkers are, I mean, everyone that's played Brood War and everyone that knows past, you know, you've even seen them in the campaign as well. So they've been around. They're definitely a thing that people have seen before. And I think it's cool. I think it's just going to give a lot of different options for a lot of different scenarios. And it'll make the game a little more interesting. Things like killing observers will be a big deal. ZVZ should change a lot from this, especially if you can start targeting overseers or have different ways to deal with their detection. It'll change a lot. It might be to the point where lurkers are a stable unit to build in pretty much every matchup. But it's just impossible to know right now until we start to see the units all start to hit each other. But I think this is an idea that's stable enough and everyone's okay with it to the point where there's no reason not to have done it, and it's kind of surprising that they didn't do it for Heart of the Swarm, but it's finally here, so it'll be cool. So let's check out Corruptors. The Corruptors especially have been the unit for Zerg that I thought have needed a facelift for a really long time, because they've been so narrow in their application. It's just basically make Corruptors if they're making carriers, or make Corruptors if they are making battlecruisers, and besides those, or maybe make Corruptors if they're making Colossus. Besides those scenarios, and especially once they deal with those units, they've been useless. So what they introduced on the Corruptor is a ability that will deal damage to ground units and will kind of scale up over time, kind of the same way that the old Void Rays used to work. I'm not sure about the specific mechanics of it, and as far as the ramp up and whatnot, because it's always going to be very subject to change. The idea is good in the sense that they're trying to give it a purpose beyond just killing the units that it was targeted for, so you can actually do more with it. Or maybe you can be the one to build them on your own and have a use for them rather than needing to build them as a reaction only. So it'll open up a lot of different options, and it'll give Zerg players some different ways to deal with different scenarios. Plus it'll give Zergs more of a harassment opportunity with these units, whereas they've just never been a thing before. So the mechanics and stuff, I get the point of it, but the mechanics will almost assuredly change on this unit. The way that they kill ground structures and the way that the damage ramps up, I don't feel like that's going to stick around too much, but the idea of them being useful beyond just as a reaction and just to deal with the units that they were built as a reaction to is going to change a lot. They're going to be more proactive, they're going to have more of their own little role as far as a unit that Zerg just didn't really have before. So it'll be cool to see what they do. I'd also like to see them change a lot of the Corruptors' just base traits as far as fighting units, because they still are a problem when you make them against Colossus and they just get fried by Void Rays, or against PDD just does way too much against them if you're fighting battlecruisers. So there's still some other things I'd like to see them change to make this unit a little bit more useful. But the fact that they're finally thinking about it and finally doing something with it is cool. But I need to also remind you guys that they actually had an ability idea just like this one for Heart of the Swarm that didn't make it into the game because they just didn't think it would be good enough. So they're bringing it back and in some form or another, so that's why I think they're going to stick with it more this time and not give up like they did before. So I guess it's a good step in the right direction. Now let's talk about the Infestor. And basically it just got a new ability, and the new ability gives a flat damage buff to everything that it hits with it. So it's kind of an area of effect casting. As you can see, those brown clouds right there have affected the Zerglings that were underneath them, and now the Zerglings have a higher attack. This seems pretty obvious as far as its application. This seems obvious to give Zerglings a purpose against Terran armies. It seems to give them a purpose against late game Protoss armies. And it seems to give them a purpose in ZVZ in the sense that Infestor Ling builds will definitely be back and be a thing to get into more things like Ultras or maybe Broodlords or something like that in ZVZ. This is kind of a predictable change, I think. It was pretty easy to see them realize that Zerglings are pretty worthless in every single game scenario beyond about the 14-minute mark. There wasn't really a reason to make them anymore in a lot of situations. So this seems like Infestor Ling is something that they wanted to push again, like they did in Wings of Liberty. But back in Wings of Liberty, it was much more about the Infestor killing everything and the Zerglings just kind of buffering versus the Zerglings actually doing the damage. So this is a more elegant solution, I think, to make Infestor Zergling actually be a thing again. And it obviously won't be too strong. And I'd also like to see a couple of nuances altered with this. I don't think it'll be too strong in the super late game with big armies of like Ultralists or something, because it's just a flat damage buff. So if the flat damage buff is something like +2, then it would be like an extra attack upgrade on a Roach, or an extra attack upgrade on a Hydralisk, or, you know, it will definitely benefit units with lower damage per shot as is, which seems almost exclusively focused to Zerglings. And I guess also to infested Terrans, which is something I was gonna start thinking about. I think it may actually become a problem if they keep it on ranged units as well. If they localize it to a couple of units, say like melee units for example, I think that can work. It does make the ability very narrow, so they might have to find some rule as far as what units to apply it to, because otherwise this just being applied to things like Roaches and Hydralisks is not really all that interesting, and it just makes Roach Infestor more common in ZVZ if anything, and that's kind of boring, and it seems like an unintended consequence of what's going on here. So their explanation on this was like, you know, 20 seconds at most. So they didn't focus too much on it, which leads me to believe that they don't really have a solid direction on it. So I'm a little worried about this one actually staying on, but I think the more that they can kind of localize it and make it make sense on various different levels will be a good idea. And my idea for it just being on melee is not a good idea per se, it's just an example of an idea, so if they want to focus it on one thing or another, it'd make more sense. So I don't know. I think they'll find a way to use this, but I hope it doesn't use it to make, you know, Roach Hydra more linear, because that would be kind of lame just to be like Roach Hydra, but it shoots more damage. Rawr, that's fun. It really should be to open up new compositions, so I hope we can see that. So let's talk about the Swarm Host now, and this was a big focal point, especially for casual fans of Starcraft, because the Swarm Host slowed the game down so much to a point where there was just nothing going on for 20 minutes at a time, because the unit just sat there behind a wall of static defenses, and it was frankly boring. I don't know how else to say it. The Swarm Hosts were boring. There was very rarely a game of Swarm Hosts that I said, wow, that was cool, that was a lot of fun to watch. And I get what they were trying to do initially with this unit in Heart of the Swarm. They were trying to say, we want battles to last longer, and we want people to have more to do with their army at all times. But they didn't seem to realize where the Swarm Host was going, and the Swarm Host was going to make games stupidly long to the point where it was multiple hours, and players would just sit there and either lose all their units to Swarm Host while the Zerg player did nothing but control a few Vipers and just let the Swarm Hosts sit there and do their thing. So what they've changed it to is that Swarm Hosts, the Locust will spawn a lot less frequently, they will be stronger, and as you can see they can spawn from above ground. And this looks like Xel'Naga Caverns, which is hilarious that they'd actually do a demo on this map. I'd never noticed this before now, but I think this is actually Xel'Naga Caverns. Anyway, so the idea here is that the Swarm Hosts would be much more on a drop their Locust and run type of play, which is what was interesting in Heart of the Swarm when it got into that situation, which was fairly rare. But the idea here is it's meant to be more of a harassment unit, and it's meant to be more of a unit that's kind of risk and reward, which I think is cool. Because risk and reward is way more fun to watch, it's way more fun to play than just sit there and do nothing while your free units kill everything. And they realize that, and they're trying to get away from that very hard, and I agree with it a lot. So basically, your Swarms would be walking around, you'd spawn some Locusts, and then you'd walk away, and try to do as much as you can with the Locusts in their limited lifetime. But they will be a little bit stronger, at least initially, And I understand why, because if you want it to be more about risk and reward, then if you're risking losing your Swarm host every single time you try to deploy your Locust, then they better do something if you're actually successful. Another upgrade they talked about with the Swarm host is that they can be upgraded to fly. At least the Locust can. Now, don't freak out here, because while they can fly, they still have to land on the ground in order to start doing their damage. So it's not like you'll have a huge problem with dealing with these things. They're not going to kill your whole air army. They're just to get over gaps and stuff to make harassment a little bit more viable. So that if they're on a space somewhere near another base, that they can just deploy them, the Locust will lift off, and you can move them to a different landable location. So this, everyone I feel like saw this change and they were like, what the hell is this? This is so broken. But it doesn't work that way. It's actually not going to be too bad. And it's going to fit the unit's role really well, in the sense that it's supposed to be a harassment unit, and it will be for harass more than anything. I can't see it being a unit you can just make 20 of and try to run forward and deploy them, because people will eventually start to figure that out and just go around the Locust and chase your Swarm host down, and you'll be dead. So I really like where the Swarm host is right now, and I don't see it changing a ton before it's time to drop the game. Obviously, numbers will be changed, but for the most part, I think it's in a good place. So let's take a look at Nidus worms. They changed this a lot, and I've been saying this for a long time, that Nidus worms had no role in the game. Their role was supposed to be like mobile reinforcement points. It was supposed to be for harassment, but it never did that for a multitude of reasons. One of them being that it was just too expensive, another one being that it was too fragile, and people would rather just move around on predictable paths to try to get harassment done, which is why players like Life have been so successful, having just won the BlizzCon Championship as of a couple days before this video is done. So basically the idea with the Nidus worms is they want to make it so that the worms can't be attacked until they've actually spawned. This is a good idea in the sense that it will force people to kind of think of different ways to deal with what's coming out of the Nidus worms, whether it's force fields, whether it's just waiting for the worm to pop and killing it right away. But I do have a little bit of a concern in the sense that it could be used for really gimmicky purposes against a lot of builds that are trying to get a little more economic. And the difficulty with Zerg, especially with figuring out what's going on, is it's hard to see what they're doing, because Zerglings can control the map really easily. So I don't want this to be a unit that people just make a bunch of stupid cheese builds for and just make a Nidus worm knowing that there's no way a bunch of workers are going to be able to kill it. And that's not really a cool design space if the other person just can't know that it's coming. If it's a late game unit that's used to reinforce all over the map or force fights and stuff, and that's its role, and that's how it works, then perfect. There's no complaints there that I have. I think that's fine, and I hope that that's where it goes. So we'll see what happens with this. I do expect some change or another, but I think overall the idea of making Nidus worms more useful is something they should have done a long time ago, and I'm kind of surprised they waited this long to do so. So as far as the basic idea of what they want to do with the game, they definitely want to make the game more about micro, more about multitasking all over the map, and just general craziness, because craziness is more fun to watch and it's more fun to play. They want to have a lot better options for harassment, so we'll note that Nidus worms did get a lot stronger. Swarm host did change to a much more harassment based type of role, so there's definitely way more tools there, and ideally there will be a bunch of different fights all over the map all the time, so that watching games is just as fun or more fun than actually playing. And I think that's all really good design philosophy. As far as more emphasis on all-ins versus macro, basically they've gone out of their way to eliminate some all-ins entirely, which I think is great, because Immortal all-ins and Gateway all-ins have been around for a long time, and they're just not that interesting. There's not much more to say. They're just boring. And it's cool to see them finally phase that out in some way or another that I think is reasonable. So that's definitely a cool thing. And as far as all-ins versus macro, since the bases are going to mine out so fast, and since people will start with a lot more workers, expanding rapidly, like every 4 or 5 minutes at the minimum, is going to be a necessity to keep up with everything that's going on. So that'll be cool. That'll be cool to see especially the really top players, just taking the whole map really fast and having to try and scramble and defend everywhere at once. Diversity of viable strategies is something I touched on a lot with the Infestor change, and especially the Swarm Host change. So I think they're trying to look at different ways to deal with different scenarios, and especially the scenario in TVZ when trying to deal with bio has become very linear and kind of uninteresting, and a very large part of PVZ has become uninteresting, so, or rather ZVP, either way, depending on how you want to look at it. So I think they're trying to introduce a lot of different play styles and trying to make those all balanced. So this is going to be quite the project to get it to that point, which is why I think this game is going to stay in beta for a really long time. And they realize that this is their last chance to really make a big footprint on the Starcraft universe for a long time, because Brood War stuck around in Korea for 10 plus years, and it was a huge deal then because they made just the game play perfectly, and they not perfectly, but they made it play to a point where multitasking and craziness all over the map and all that good stuff was a big part of the game, and that's what they're going for with this. So I have a lot of faith in what they're doing for this. They have the right idea here. I just realized on the bottom left of my screen I still say StarCraft 2 Heart of the Swarm, so that was a derpy mistake, so I guess I'll get that fixed for future videos, but whatever. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the game. Be sure to sign up for the beta, and they will email you once you get in. I'll be releasing videos for the beta as soon as I get my invite, which will be just gameplay stuff. We'll play around with different ideas, show you guys some cool stuff that they're thinking about doing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions or anything. And I do have to apologize, I didn't get a great chance to test this out at BlizzCon because of all the technical problems they were having with WCS, so oh well, no big deal. Once beta comes around you'll see more, so look out for that, and I suppose I'll see you guys later.